Cindy, thank you very much for joining the program.
Oh, my pleasure.
You were once quoted as saying that when you married John McCain, you knew he would always put country first. That was the words you used. I'm curious, that would be great for the country, but how was that for you?
Well, I understood him as the man, and I respected what he was saying to me and loved what he was saying to me. I mean, that doesn't mean that, of course, I took second place or our children took second place, but in the way he conducted his life and conducted, his business, it was country first. And I think it not only did I admire it, but it made me feel wonderful when I had first heard him say that.
And yet I look back, I know when you went to Washington with him back in 1983. And 1980, excuse me.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you went back to Arizona, and as you've described it yourself, in many ways, you were a single mom. You have 4 kids. I got 4 kids of my own. If I did that, my wife might throw me off a building.
Well, it wasn't. We had a child just after John was first elected, and it was a choice that we made because we wanted to raise our children in a good environment. It was more important, in my opinion and in my husband's opinion, to raise decent children than it was to live in a. Can you answer that, Megan? To raise a decent family in a decent, in a decent environment than it was to live in a certain place. John's the one that had to make the flight each weekend, and was the one that really had to make the sacrifice. I stayed home with him, but he came home either every Thursday or every Friday. He was completely committed to us once he got home. So really, I think we had a better life than we would have if we lived in Washington.
How frustrating.
He worked full time in Washington, and when he headed home, he was ours, and it was wonderful.
How frustrating was it for you when you first went to Washington? In the past, you've described how some people would look at you as the quote-unquote trophy wife. I mean, you have a master's degree in special education. You think, I'm a smart person. What's that feel like?
Well, in the beginning, it was frustrating because so much of Washington, as you know, it's a company town, would be, shaking hands with you and wanting to know, who. They just assumed it was my husband that was the one that was, the important person in the relationship, and who it was. And a lot of the times, I did feel a little bit slighted because it was kind of like they'd shake your hand and look over your head looking for your husband. It's the nature of the beast in Washington. I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just the way it is, and I just learned to deal with it. That's what I had to do, and consequently, like I said, I lived at home most of the time, and I had the best of all worlds. I was able to go to Washington for the fun things.
And yet at the same time, I don't know if I could say, obviously you can't say it's good or bad. That sounds bad to me.
Well, no, it was frustrating. It was for me, it wasn't bad. I mean, it didn't affect my relationship or anything. It was just really about trying to adjust to a new political world. I married a Navy captain and thought I was going to be a Navy wife. And when we went into politics, it was a different sort of beast for me. And it took some time for me to really kind of begin to understand what it was all about and understand my role in it and understand what I could do with it also. And like any new bride, my first and foremost duty, I felt, was to my husband and my children, and that was always my priority. So it really didn't matter, what was going on to me in Washington, other than my husband was happy in the work that he was doing.
And yet, at the same time, again, having to raise all of these kids, you ended up having. I appreciate. I see what my wife goes through when I was in Darfur and everywhere else I go, and I look at what you've had to deal with. Back in '89, you had ruptured discs in your back. You had a whole set of surgeries from that. You ended up getting addicted to Vicodin, Percocet, and he's in Washington. I mean, that's a burden.
Well, I tell you, there were times, I will say, when it ended on Thursday or Friday, I not literally, but in a kind of way. If you imagine a cartoon character, I was hanging from the ceiling because I had a long week with the kids. But John would always walk in. He was the voice of reason and would calm things down. And yes, I did. I had a problem, and the reason my husband did not know is because I didn't want him to know. I was embarrassed, and I didn't want to ever disappoint my husband. So his him not knowing what was going on was of my doing. And once I did tell him, I mean, I realized that he was not only my best friend, but he was my best supporter. And so it was actually a new chapter in our marriage, and also something that, we grew from this. Our relationship grew as a result of it.